Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grid Live Wrap Up. We got a full house here. I'm Joe. Along with me, we have Kobe, Matt, Amanda, Ben, and Ed. Special thank you to Ed from Formula E Zone for staying up late. Encourage everyone to participate in the chat room and also check out our Patreon page, calling the show Mark and Robin. Along with David, invest in us each and every month to stay on the air. You can also do Buy Me a Coffee, where you buy coffee, contribute to somebody on the air too as well, and of course to the Grid Network. And we have a lot to talk about. We're going to start with the ABB Formula E Series at Sao Paulo, Brazil. Was typical of what we come to expect when it comes to Formula E racing. 2 safety car periods, plenty of beating and banging, and once again, the winner did not come from the pole. Mitch Evans, he took the win, and overall, that was a good day for Jaguar because Jaguar, they had the top 3 positions when it comes to the powertrain. Nick Cassidy in the Envision taking second place, but Pascal Wehrlein drove a smart race, 7th place finish, but the big thing, he extended his points lead. He is now 24 points ahead of Jake Dennis, who did not finish the race, did not score valuable points. Nick Cassidy is now 1 point behind Dennis and behind Nick Cassidy by 1 point. John-Eric Vergne is closing up there for second place in the championship. Edward, Kobe, was Pascal Wehrlein the big winner this race weekend?
I would say no, because he didn't win the race. But I think Jaguar unquestionably was the biggest winner because there was so much pressure on them coming into this. And if I'm quiet, it's because there's people trying to sleep in the other room. But but I thought it was an amazing performance from Jaguar, where I think there are a lot of more fancied runners like Porsche and Da Costa especially that were running very strongly and then made a lot of mistakes. And DS were really inefficient in the DS Penske powertrain. So Stoffel Van Dorn, despite getting pole position, ended up leading a lot of the race and giving people a tow down the straights, which they could use to save energy effectively by regenning, under braking and lifting and coasting into the corners behind him without losing too much speed. And in the end, Jaguar went for a very conservative strategy, saving energy early on, and it paid off for both Jaguar, factory Jaguars, and of course for Nick Cassidy as well. And all 3 of them, I think, drove really well, especially Sam Bird with his grid penalty. And I think Pascal Wehrlein, he did sort of what he needed to do, 18th on the grid, recovered ground into the top 7. But he saved his attack modes till late in the race. And I think potentially, with a little bit of a better strategy, Porsche could have got a lot more out of that race. But Pascal, after binning it in Cape Town, not scoring any points, I think he'll come away pretty happy with that.
Yeah, I don't really have too much to add to what Ed said because he pretty much said it all. Great day for Jaguar. Both cars on the podium. Mitch Evans and Sam Bird, really great day for them. But Pascal Wehrlein been able to extend his championship points lead. That's the main thing at the end of the day because Jake Dennis started off hot right up there with Wehrlein. Now Dennis has kind of been falling apart these last few races, and it's going to be interesting to see moving forward if Dennis is going to be able to respond and try to get back in the fight here, because if he doesn't, Pascal Wehrlein, he needs to get those good points finishes, and if Dennis continues to struggle, Wehrlein's is going to go down the road, and it's going to become harder and harder for Dennis to try to get up there and contend for this year's Formula E World Championship.
Yesterday, Kobe, we said there was more pressure on Jake Dennis because everyone was starting to get closer and closer to him. He crashed out, no points again. He almost took out Wehrlein, actually, with that contact that came from Dan Tickton from behind. Jake Dennis put all the blame on Dan Tickton for the accident. Dan Tickton did accept responsibility, saying there was no grip when he went offline, so he couldn't slow down. It was just one of those racing deals where some people were really talking about this on social media. Edward, do you agree with Dennis placing all the blame for what happened, or is this just hard racing, especially when you're mid-pack and you have an off weekend compared to past race weekends?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And the contact with Dennis and Wehrlein was interesting because actually, and I didn't realize this until looking at interviews afterwards, Wehrlein said that his floor was damaged by Dennis sort of, and clearly Dennis, the car was damaged and it was basically going to come to a stop no matter what, and he was wrestling for control and ended up just barging into the side of Wehrlein, which is a little bit unfortunate. I don't think he kind of meant to do that. And I don't think Dan Ticktum really meant to crash into him either. It was weird because at the start finish line, it's a little bit more like a normal circuit at Brazil. It's similar to the one that used to host IndyCar in the middle of Sao Paulo. And the inside line was very, very dirty because you saw it on the getaway from the start-finish grid that everyone on the right-hand side was very, very slow, bogged down off the grid, and everyone on the left on the racing line just zoomed away and got an amazing start. And so whenever somebody tried to brake late on the inside, and Ticktum was making a move on, I think, 2 other cars and just couldn't stop in time, and it just so happened that Jake Dennis was right there, so it's not like he could have bailed for the runoff or anything. And Ticktum lost his front wing and just had a bit of a messy race, especially after Cape Town, where Ticktum finished, I think, top 6 and got his best result of the season. So certainly not a moment where Dan Ticktum covered himself in glory, but hey, he fessed up to it. It wasn't anywhere near a deliberate crash. And I think in a way, Ticktum is kind of an easy target for a lot of critics in the media because of his history in junior formula and the sort of infamous incident from years ago, back in 2015, actually, where there was a deliberate crash he caused that got him banned for a year from racing. But he has come back from that, and he's since sort of tried to reform himself a little bit. He hasn't done anything deliberate since then. But yeah, so I got a feel for Jake Dennis because it's a big blow for his title challenge. But I have a feeling that he's still second in the points, which is pretty amazing. So I think because he had such a good start to the season, it's almost like a season of 2 halves. So the first half, he was first in the first race, and then second in Saudi Arabia had the 2 races there. And then the last 3 races have kind of no points at all through no fault of his own, really. So I think Dennis will come back, but he needs to work on his qualifying because that was the big Achilles heel, like you said, that put him in the pack, made him vulnerable, and kind of meant that when he should have really been running up front, he was a target for steamrollering Dan Ticktum, essentially. So fingers crossed, Dennis has a better time in Berlin in about a month's time or so.
I pretty much have to agree with you. I feel like when you're in the pack in Formula E, you open yourselves up for a lot of problems. It's physical racing, tight quarters. Granted, we saw plenty of great racing spread out all throughout the race. This is just something where I feel he put himself there. The qualifying effort was not great. You got drivers trying to get points, valuable points. Only the top 10 are going to get it. It's just one of those racing deals. Unfortunate break for Jake Dennis, and just unfortunate break for him lately. The next Formula E race is going to be in mid-April. So after this race results, pretty much a top 5 in the ABB Formula E grid rating will be in the grid ranking next week. So the top 5 will advance. As you can see, Pascal Wehrlein with a very big lead. Wehrlein, 2 wins, only 1 race with a finish worse than 7th. So he's well ahead of Dennis. And then one of the big things as well, too, Nick Cassidy, as you can see, 2nd place compared to in the Formula E standings, 3 podiums in a row. So overall, really good effort. Then you have Jake Dennis, John Eric Grant, and Antonio Felix da Costa, who also has a win this year. Now, Cassidy has been on the podium, as I mentioned, the last 3 races in a row. Jake Dennis has not scored a point in the last 3 races. Kobe, after seeing the grid rating, do you believe Dennis' fast start is losing energy? Can Cassidy, Verne, or da Costa overtake Jake Dennis and that ready Avalanche team?
Yeah, as I was saying, Dennis is kind of cold. He's kind of on a cold streak right now. Ed was mentioning, the victory at the beginning of the season in Mexico City. Then the 2 races in Saudi Arabia, finished on the podium, both of those. Since then, 13th in Cape Town, and then retirement from the Sao Paulo E-Prix yesterday. And as Ed was saying, I think Dennis certainly has the ability to come back and bounce back from what's been happening these last 3 races, which totally uncharacteristic of this Avalanche Andretti team and Jake Dennis. So I think there's will be a great opportunity for him to bounce back. But looking at the Formula E point standing, I certainly think if Dennis cannot shake off this bad luck, you'll see Nick Cassidy, Jean-Eric Vergne, and Antonio Felix da Costa ready to pounce because those drivers they're riding a hot streak right now, while Dennis needs to get this bad luck out of his system. And also another good point Ed brought up, qualify much better.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and certainly in terms of the race, we didn't talk about it too much, but Cassidy was one that was sort of leading quite a long way into it, and then just got pipped by Mitch Evans with I think 2 laps to go, effective of 2 or 3 laps to go, I think near the end because there was an extension due to the safety cars. But we had I think 9 different. I think I was counting. Josh was counting it during the race, and he told me at one point we had 8 different 8 lead changes, and I think we had 9 by the end. That was the 9th one, so that was pretty unprecedented even by Formula E standards. It was a very energy sensitive race with the long straights, and clearly it was a game, like I said, with Van Dorn, that nobody wanted to lead the race. Everyone wanted to sort of stay in the slipstream. I think Evans and Cassidy were 2 of the best at it. But yeah, I think Mitch Evans a little bit further back in the championship, and Sam Bird not too far off Da Costa now either. After his podium, he's only about 12 or 13 points back of those top guys. So I think there's a big congregation over second, and I still think that Jake, like Kobe said, Jake Dennis can recover. But the big story for me is Pascal Wehrlein. He keeps chipping away, extending that lead, and I think if he keeps doing that, then by the tail end of the season, he's going to be very, very difficult to catch. So somebody needs to get a winning streak going, and I have a feeling the DS isn't efficient enough. I feel like it's either going to be a Jaguar or a Porsche-powered car that ends up bringing the fight to Pascal Wehrlein. So I think it's either going to be Jake Dennis, Nick Cassidy, or potentially someone like Sam Bird or Mitch Evans if they go on an amazing running run, in my opinion.
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens if anybody could catch up to Pascal Wehrlein, because as you mentioned, Pascal Wehrlein, if he keeps putting together these strong runs, strong efforts, he could really start to pull away. Just even in our grid rating alone, he's been starting to pull away. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this all shakes up. And of course, we'll be following Formula E all season long right here on the Grid Network. Before we switch to NASCAR, Ed, thank you so much for your time. We encourage everyone to visit Formula E Zone. Link will be in the video description. What is your one shining moment of the weekend?
Oh, I thought we'd never ask Joe. Well, my one shining moment would probably be in terms of the driving. I have to say, I think Sebastian Buemi had a really tough start to the race. A couple of laps in, and it was a weird thing as well because Manxman and Gunther sort of skipped the first chicane, which was sort of a big no-no. A lot of drivers getting penalised for that, and Gunther was one of them. And then at the second chicane, which is a very awkward kind of right-left, where we saw a lot of concertinaing, Gunther was sort of on the inside slowing, and Buemi didn't quite react in time and hit the back of him and injured his thumb, actually. It was quite because they don't have power steering in these Formula E cars, so it was quite a big impact on his wrist, and we've seen Robin Frein suffer a big injury of it in Mexico earlier, but Buemi's it wasn't as bad. He had to come to a dead stop and lost a bit of his front wing, but a large chunk of it actually, but decided to basically manage his energy, caught up with a later safety car, and was able to snatch the final point, win 10th later in the race. So I think sustaining all of that and then having to be bandaged at the end of the race and sort of hurriedly doing interviews with his arm in a bit of a cast, essentially, I think I'd have to give it to Sebastian Buemi, even though maybe his teammate Cassidy got a lot of the glory and Evans as well. I would have to say I think Buemi gets my one shining moment for carrying on despite being in incredible pain in his thumb.
Racing in pain, we've seen this. It seems throughout it, but it seems it becomes less and less. But as you said, Buemi put in one effort to get the race done. And of course, we encourage everyone to visit Formula E Zone for all Formula E coverage and subscribe to us right here on YouTube. Matthew, before we get into NASCAR, one comment in the chat room from Casey Campbell. 6 wide. Yep, Casey, we have all 6 of us here, but we're going to let it go soon because now
5 wide then.
It'll be 5 wide, then 4 wide, but then we got to talk about NASCAR, which we saw some 5 and 6 wide during those restarts.
Yeah, and absolutely. I was just going to make that reference too, Joe. Like the majority of those restarts were 5, 6 wide. Pretty incredible scenes, though, there at the EchoPark Automotive Grand Prix from the Circuit of the Americas. It certainly was an interesting one, to say the least. Stage 1 had 2 cautions before we even hit lap 10 for multiple incidents. Jimmy Johnson, who had a lot of hype going into this race with Legacy Motor Club, Ty Dillon with
I almost said colleague. Oh my gosh. Spire Motorsports and then Bubba Wallace with 2311 were all out of the race very early. In fact, Johnson and Dillon failed to complete a lap while Wallace only completed 10. However, after stage 1, stage 2 actually ran caution free. It's very interesting. We'll talk a little bit about the stages. There were no stage breaks. So that was interesting. So going into a stage 1 ended on a bit of an odd restart, which allowed William Byron to capture his 4th stage win of the season, more than any other driver. Then stage 2 went green throughout, and Tyler Reddick won stage 2 using a bit of strategy calls that ultimately helped him towards the end. And then another caution setup, yet another great battle between arguably the two best cars of this race. It was back and forth. Tyler Reddick lost the read on the restart, gave it to William Byron. The two swap positions back and forth, giving the fans great racing for the league. I'd argue some of the best racing we have seen so far this season. However, there was one more caution for Brad Keselowski that set up a restart with 10 to go. A lot of us were hoping that was going to be the last caution. It wasn't. Several drivers, including Kimi Räikkönen, former Formula One world champion, he stayed out for position, ended up being in the top 5 towards the end restarts of the race. But still, the battle appeared to be Reddick versus Byron for the lead and ultimately for the win. No, I'm talking a lot, but I'm going to get into a question about this, I promise. But after a plethora of cautions and 3 overtime attempts, yes, 3, Tyler Reddick ultimately took the win. So I'm going to throw this question to Amanda. Welcome to the Grid Wrap-Up Show. I'm going to ask you, is Tyler Reddick back, and do you believe he's ready to compete for wins week after week, or is this just the road course racing dominance that got him the win?
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, I would say that Tyler's road course dominance was definitely on display. There's no doubt about that this weekend. It was great to see him out front and all of the battling he did with William Byron and the other front runners. I think it might be a tiny bit too early to say how that translates to the rest of his racing, knowing that he was really dominant in some of the areas that are specific to road course racing, such as his, cornering and the way he was able to brake and outbrake the rest of the field, really. So I guess my answer would be we'll have to see, but I hope so. I'm excited to see what we can see from him. Yeah.
Well, like Matthew, I'll preface my comments. Welcome to the team, Amanda. We're happy to have you. In terms of Tyler Reddick, I think that he's certainly getting there. If he isn't there already, he did better in an RCR car than anybody previous to him for a long, long time. Winning 3 races last year, is now at a new home in 2311 Racing. Seems to be trending upwards as well. We remember talking about how terrible Toyota were on the road courses last year as a whole unit, not just 2311, but Joe Gibbs Racing as well. I remember being out at Sonoma last year, and I think Kurt Busch was the only car in the top 25. So they had an absolutely horrendous day out there. And that was just one example of it. But this has to be a huge shot in the arm, not just for 2311, but for Toyota, for their road course program. And to have a driver like Tyler Reddick, we can talk about him being able to compete for wins week in and week out, but we have to start talking about him as maybe one of the best road course racers in the Cup Series right now, because he certainly put on a clinic today there towards the end. They tried their best to take it away from him with the amount of overtime restarts he had to survive. But I think in the end, the most dominant and most deserving car went to victory lane today, and that was certainly Tyler Reddick and the 45 team.
I can absolutely agree with both of the comments from both of you, Ben and Amanda. And I think it felt, from a biased perspective, it felt darn good to finally get the pick a winner right. I started with Tyler Reddick. I said earlier on this season that Toyota, I think it might be a 2311 over JGR. Right now it's 1-0. So far so good. It's very early in the season, only 6 races complete. But I think, like Ben just said to you guys, that Tyler Reddick's not only becoming, I think, one of the best drivers for maybe Toyota, best drivers in the sport. The road courses, he's won 3 of the 7 next-gen courses. Our very own Jonathan also pointed that out, too, on Twitter. I saw he is the only driver in the next-gen era to win multiple races on road courses. He's won 3 of them. In fact, 75% of Tyler Reddick's Cup Series wins have come on road courses, whether it was Road America, whether it was the Indy road course, and whether it was COTA today. I think this definitely shows Tyler Reddick from really starting the season seemed like what is going on with that team. Anything that could possibly go wrong to Tyler Reddick went wrong with 2311. He was behind Pastrana for multiple races and points. even though Pastrana only ran the one race. Now numerous top fives and then getting to the win. I really think we can see Reddick, if he gains that confidence, if the team can keep up that confidence. We know Kurt Busch has confidence in that team, as we heard on the Fox Sports broadcast. I think Reddick can continue his road course dominance. I think he can really continue to compete for wins. I mean, he has 4 of them in this next gen era. That's top 3, I think, out of all the drivers since the next gen has started. I believe only Elliott and Logano maybe have more. I think Chastain's up there as well. But besides that, so Tyler Reddick, he's now in the playoffs. This is the first Toyota to win this season. And it's not a Joe Gibbs Racing. It's actually a 2311 Toyota. So we have Joey Logano, 1 Ford-ending Chevrolet streak. William Byron has 2 wins. Kyle Busch and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. are the Chevrolets to win this season. So besides Stenhouse, the other drivers would most likely anticipate a win, I feel, and being in the playoffs, or another win, I should say. So I'm going to start with you on this one, Ben. Are we starting to see a level of parity widen between the big and smaller teams, or do you think it's kind of the same as it was last season?
I think so. I think we're going to start to see the big teams pull away a little bit, and I think we've always expected that to happen. When we moved over to the Generation 7 car, the next gen car, obviously we had a ton of parity last year, and started talking about getting to the point where we're going to get 16 winners in the first 26 races, and what that meant for the playoff grid, and I think we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. But I think now that the teams have a year of development underneath them, the teams with larger budgets, more sponsorship, more resources, you're going to start to see them be able to utilize those and pull away a little bit. So I think it is going to be a little bit harder for those small teams to stay with the bigger teams. And the result of that, I think, is going to be somebody, 1, 2, maybe 3 drivers establishing themselves as championship favorites. Whereas last year, obviously, with all the parity we saw, it was a little bit more wide open. So I think as the season goes on, you're going to see more and more of that as it continues.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with everything Ben just said. I think that with as the teams gain experience with this next gen car, the bigger teams are going to pull a little bit wider of a gap to the smaller teams, and we're just going to see that consistently grow. And the consistency with people that are going to be with drivers that are going to be running up front is going to start to develop just due to the resources that those bigger teams have under and the experience they have under their belt and their ability to adapt to the car and get the most out of it, maybe a little bit quicker than the smaller teams.
Yeah, definitely. And before I get into my answer, I see we have a couple comments in the chat room. Adam Lemery says, nice shirt, Amanda. I can definitely agree with that. She's coming with the fashion, the Dale Earnhardt Sr. shirt as well, coming with the Jeff Gordon. I love it. Casey Campbell is asking, what are your thoughts on Suarez? I actually brought that up in the group me. I don't know if you saw. Kind of a little reckless for, a lack of a better term at the end. He definitely was displeasured, and I could imagine Suarez being up all front. Chastain, Bowman incident. I know Bowman had a couple dive bombings. So what happened was after the race, for those who have not seen the video, Suarez kind of in the cool down lap sped up, actually bumped his teammate Chastain off pretty much out of pit road, and then sped up on pit road while officials, everything were out, and gave Bowman a couple, love taps, another lack of a better term. So, we saw that with Ty Gibbs' frustration with Ty Dillon on pit road when officials are out there. I think this might warrant a penalty. I'm not sure what's going to happen, though. Obviously, don't take my word for it, but I feel like what we've seen in the past. How do you guys feel about that if you saw the Suarez incident after the race?
Well, I think if you want to bring the Ty Gibbs incident into that was a little bit different because it was on a live pit road during the race. Whereas this, from what I've seen, maybe there was more after the video cut off. I'm not sure, but it looked to me like he ironically enough bumped his teammate out of the way to chase Bowman into the pits and gave him a couple taps from there. And by the time they got to the pit lane where there were crew members standing around, then it was a little bit more civil after that. I'm not trying to find, an excuse for Suarez. I still think, that's a little bit too dangerous of a game to be playing. But, I don't know that it warrants, the same amount of criticism that we gave Ty Gibbs last year, because obviously what Ty Gibbs did, you can't defend that at all. So I think, obviously not an ideal situation for Suarez or Bowman to be in there. But I guess we'll know for sure in a couple of days if any penalties are going to come from that.
Yeah, I'd have to say I think it's just a bit reckless behavior, if anything, for him to, from what I saw, speed up to be able to chase him down in the pits, and then knowing that there are all of the race support people there, and I think that no one was in any serious danger, but a mistake or being that angry and reckless could easily turn into something tragic. So I think that there should be some sort of consequence. I'm not sure what or to what extent a penalty is warranted, but I think that, yeah, it's not the kind of behavior we want to see week in and week out.
Definitely. I can agree with both of those points too. I think tensions run high. I mean, they really do. We saw even heart rates. Tyler Reddick's heart rate got up to like 184. I saw during the race. I don't think I ran cross country. I know, Ben, you ran cross country. I don't even think in our worst race we hit 184. So I could imagine with our heart rate. So I don't know in a stock car going with a heart rate going that fast. But I think there's a couple more comments as well in the chat room. Very excited. We encourage you guys here with Grid Network to keep commenting, really. So another one from our very own Casey Campbell as well. What are your thoughts on the Bubba interview? I think we'll talk about this a little more. I think it's a little worrisome. I think if you guys are aware with 2311's Bubba Wallace in the documentary, you'll notice that he's one of those drivers that battles a lot of depression, a lot of mental health. And to hear an interview of someone being so hard on themselves about something that might not have been his fault at the end of the day. I know they talked about a toe link that could have been just something he said, but saying that he possibly needs to be replaced or something like that after having 2 bad weeks after finishing in the top 5, it's worrisome. I mean, granted, I think all of us want to go out there to be the best we could possibly be every single day. Don't settle for anything less than what you're capable of. But there comes a point in time where you got to really step back and say not everything's going to go your way. And mental health's a really scary thing, and a little worried about Bubba Wallace. I mean, it's unfortunate any driver in any circumstance to be that down on themselves. Even like when he finished second at Michigan, I remember seeing him like upset after the race, like best finish of the year at that point. It's a scary situation. I mean, I'm probably not going to talk much more about this at the time, but if you guys want to chime in very quickly to get through it. But
yeah, and look, I know, particularly men's mental health, I think, is a subject that, is difficult to talk about, and we don't prioritize it enough. But I think in Bubba's case in particular, he's got to be very careful because, obviously, he's been through so much over the last few years, and, of course, not all of it has been entirely within his control. But, when you get out here in the interview and say, I need to be replaced or something, I was just scrolling through some of the Twitter comments and Facebook comments, which I know you're really not supposed to do because they're just filled with nothing but garbage. But there are people saying like, "Oh, that's the first time I've agreed with Bubba in a very long time." Like, I mean, it feeds the trolls to continue to spew the stuff that they spew that gets into his head and everything. And so it just makes the situation worse in the long run. So, obviously, I know he's got a great support team around him at 2311. I hope that he can get the help that he needs. Because I tweeted about it as soon as I saw the interview, because it is concerning to me as well, Matthew. To look at him, after just a couple of bad weeks, coming off of, a season where he won another race and, really took a step forward in his career and has another good chance to do that this year. His teammate won the race today. Clearly 2311 are going to give him some good cars to go out there the rest of the season. It's concerning, and I hope that he gets the help that he needs.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And sorry if you can hear the rain, it's downpouring here. But yeah, I would say that there's no harsher critic than Bubba when it comes to Bubba in all aspects. And I think that Bubba receives a lot of harsh criticism and unfair criticism. And yeah, it's evident if you just read his comments or anything online. So I think that almost in a way, sometimes he is hard on himself before others can be hard on him. But I think that it's just gotten to a point where, it's a really sad thing to see. And yeah, I really hope that has people around him that are supporting him in the way that he needs to be supported.
Yeah, definitely. And just like all of us at Grid Network, I pretty much can speak for all of us when we say like mental health matters. If you need help, there's people you can find it if you can. It's really an important thing to take care of yourself before you really step into, I guess, anything, like whether it's a stock car, whether it's your home office, something like that. Take care of yourself before you go out and do things. Because at the end of the day, you control yourself. You're the most important person in your own life. So make sure that you stay healthy, stay strong. I guess like what Bubba said in his win at Talladega, stay humble. just be yourself, really, and just try to keep a positive note, because unfortunately these things happen. But not to talk more about mental health, just want to let everyone know that it's very important out there. And also, as you can read from bottom under me right here, inspection. I'm losing it, guys. Complete, no issues. Results are official. Bubba's teammate Tyler Reddick, official winner here at COTA. And to answer that question, I appreciate the comments from Casey Campbell, really engaging our group here. Always a pleasure to have him in the chat room. I think this, just to answer my point quickly before we go on the next one about the parity, I think definitely this is beginning to see. However, though, like, you would think Joe Gibbs Racing would be a little bit farther ahead of 2311, but it looks like, but before going in today, all of Toyota was in the top 20. So I guess we're seeing it more on the Chevrolet side of things, with Hendrick kind of taking off, with Kyle Busch winning. But Ricky Stenhouse Jr. getting that win at Daytona definitely kind of, it changes your opinion a little bit about the parity, because that's the small, I'd argue that might be the smallest Chevrolet team, right? Are they the only Chevrolet team that fields one car? So correct me if I'm wrong about that, but that's pretty awesome. Except the money team, obviously, with Connor Daly, which we'll discuss that a little bit later. So I think it's definitely interesting. I honestly, as a fan, in my personal opinion, love to see all the different winners, because it gets more people engaged. More people love it. That's what NASCAR's goal is, bring more people to the sport. Another thing people loved a lot was this was the first race in the Cup Series in a little bit of time that had no stage breaks, and it seemed like there was a natural flow. I'm going to throw this one to you, Amanda, first. How would you rate this race prior to the lap 56 caution, which I think definitely we could say changed the race flow a lot?
Sure. I think it was really interesting to see a lot of the strategy play out, and see teams having to adapt their strategy when depending on whether or not cautions came out. Especially when it came between choosing stage points or track position, and whether to pit or not. So yeah, I personally enjoyed this, not having stage breaks, but yeah, I think it definitely shook up the race a little bit and added a new element that I'm excited to see how it plays out in other races potentially.
I'm a purist. I think it doesn't go far enough. I would still say get rid of the stages entirely. But beggars can't be choosers. It is a good start. It is a good step in the right direction. I still think, and I made this point either during the truck or Xfinity race. I already forget which one. I guess it would have been the truck race because I was out during the Xfinity race yesterday. I still feel like, you had some of those drivers, use the stage breaks as an opportunity, or the stage ends, I guess I should say. We don't have breaks because there's no caution anymore on the road courses, but you know what I mean. I felt like it really advantaged Kyle Busch and Ross Chastain in the truck race because they could run their strategy based on the full race because they're not running for points, whereas the truck regulars had to consider, do we go for the stage win in the playoff point or do we play it out, which complicates things now that there's no caution being thrown. But to still have the stage points awarded there, I still think throws a little bit of a wrench in it that's different from pre-2017 when stage racing was introduced. So again, I know it's not going anywhere anytime soon, but I think this is a good step in the right direction, and I would like to see this change made for the oval races as well. I know some fans are saying we might need to evaluate that separately, but I would say go ahead and take that next step. In terms of this race today, I know I was saying something similar backstage. I think it went from surefire 80 to 85% on the Gluck poll to a finish that's going to disillusion a lot of fans and probably leave it on about a 50-50 split. So I think we'll touch on that here with the next question or two, but it was very, very good racing at the start of it, shaping up to be an exciting finish coming down to a fuel mileage race. And then the Keselowski caution kind of changed everything there.
Yeah, and one of my favorite debates I guess I have with Ben is I personally enjoy the stage breaks. I think I'm one of the few on this network that actually does. However, I will admit I really did enjoy what they did today with going through. I think it set up some different strategy because I still have a feeling like Tyler Reddick was in the lead with William Byron, and then Reddick actually went to pit with, I believe, 4 laps to go, which caused that interesting stage finish. I don't know. Maybe he would have stayed out to get some points. I'm not sure if they would have changed the strategy there. I don't know yet if we're going to throw this, change it automatically to do it on the ovals. I like the idea of having the 2 mini races before the final race. I don't know why. I just like the idea of the guys racing harder at the start of the race to get points instead of certain eras where we had in NASCAR where drivers would run in the 20s or 30s and towards the end and then end up winning the race, but still get the max amount of points. So I do like it, but I really liked this flow of the race. It felt just, I guess, soothing. I know that's kind of a weird word to say, but just like no caution, just kept going. Like even Reddick's, I think crew chief said, "You won the stage, keep it going, don't slow down." It was just cool, and the same with Byron winning. It just felt cool. I really did enjoy it. It was like a breath of fresh air, honestly. I think that's a fun thing. But going into a lack thereof, breath of fresh air, talking about, I think we brought this up on the pre-race show as well. Kyle Busch said that there was last weekend, he said that there was a lack of respect in the garage. I think he was talking about some of the incidents that had occurred in previous weeks. Last week, the race didn't see any notable incidents demonstrating that, which is always a good sign for NASCAR. However, just like the Indy road course, what we saw last season, drivers were just dive bombing, and they were causing late runs during the race, or late spins during the race. Ryan Preece got out of his car. I don't know if it was him or his PR manager tweeted, if you can read here, "What a bunch of hacks." I think that's a very interesting tweet. I was a little confused because I saw him with the damaged car come back onto the track and actually extend the caution. I was like, oh, well, maybe Ryan Preece, but I actually met Ryan Preece, great person, by the way, a very passionate racer. But we know these new cars can beat and bang more than the sheet metal cars from the past generations. I think we can see that with the amount of people get moved out of the way. This is the first race this year to enter the third overtime period. I know Ben is the biggest fan of overtime periods. I know we're about to talk that. Obviously, sarcasm coming out of me, but Fontana and Atlanta are actually the only races not to have an overtime. And I think this might be the only race this season where the overtime leader in 1, in 2, and overtime 3 actually won the race. I know we saw that change where a lot of the time the guy who would win towards the end of the race before an overtime usually doesn't win in overtime. But I think Reddick was in the lead for like the majority of the last 10-ish, 9-ish laps of the race. Anyway, I got to start with Ben on this one because we know how he feels about this. Do you believe, Ben, the stronger cars and the unlimited overtime rule on the road course present a problem? Or is this more of what Kyle Busch said of a lack thereof respect in the garage?
Well, I think you and I need to do a follow-up on that roundtable because I know you and I have differing opinions on NASCAR overtime. But in all seriousness, I think it's a combination of everything. It's the culture that's been manifested over the last several years in this sport. It's the double file restarts that inevitably fan out 5 or 6 wide. I mean, what do you expect is going to happen with 2 laps to go? 2 laps to go, which ultimately became however many laps we ran under caution. When the drivers are trying to get every spot they can because they know that the race is almost over. I don't know. I think that it's a combination of everything at the end of the day. I don't think we would have seen as much chaos if we'd had single file restarts like we did many, many years ago. We certainly wouldn't have seen as much chaos if we just ended races under caution like we did many, many years ago. But I mean, it's beyond the point of insanity what we did today. I mean, to sit there for, I don't even know what it ended up being, 35, 40 minutes it felt like, and have overtime after overtime after overtime. The winner didn't change at the end of the day. The best car still won. So congratulations. I guess at the bare minimum, we did get the green flag finish. I know at the Daytona 500, we couldn't even get that because they wrecked on the white flag lap anyway. So then what's the point there? You want to congratulate Kyle Busch on his Daytona 500 win in the tweet that he brought up. It's a shame it wasn't 1998. Not a personal attack on Matthew Dillon or anything. I've got a great amount of respect for the work that he does in media for this sport. But he sent a tweet out following the race that said, "I lived the years of races ending under caution. Snooze, green, white checkers rule, period. The alternative sucked," and then sucks as well, as in it would suck if we went back to it, I suppose. I don't know. I feel like today kind of sucked. It sucked just sitting there waiting for the drivers to be able to get to so much as run 1 clean lap to take the white flag. It sucked seeing so many good cars get torn up there at the end. It sucked seeing the lack of respect out there, and it was very, very frustrating for me as a viewer to be sitting there, as we went through the caution periods, and particularly at a track like COTA, which takes long enough under green. How long does it take under caution to complete a lap? So I think I understand playoffs are here to stay. Stages are here to stay. It's a different era. We're probably not going back to pre-2004 or whatever. But at the bare minimum, can we at least compromise and agree we're doing 1 attempt, no more, no less? And if we can't get it done in the 1 attempt because there's not enough respect out there, then we're just going to call it a day, because this was absolutely ridiculous. And as I said in a video I made a little over a year ago, it is still the absolute worst way to try to end a race, because sometimes we can't even end a race through the overtime period because they wreck on the white flag lap anyway. But I'll get off my soapbox. I'll hand it over to Amanda now.
Yeah, I don't know. I think today at the end it got to be a bit of an exhausting watch for sure with the unlimited overtime rule. But I think I do appreciate the stronger cars, and I think that they do their job. I think that what needs to happen, and this might fall along the line of what Kyle Busch was saying with the lack of respect, is just and there needs to be an adaptation in the way some of these drivers have been close racing, and learn how to leave space and not send it into the side of another car. But yeah, I don't know. I'm a little bit undecided, but I'd have to agree that at least for today, the unlimited overtimes was a bit tedious, and I think I'd be pretty upset if Tyler Reddick didn't come out on top after that, because he definitely deserved it, and he did a great job holding on for so long.
Definitely. And I think the more I watch these overtime finishes, what we see, I think the more I start to agree with how Ben feels about them, is because I've always been a fan of ending the race under the checkered flag. Unfortunately, a lot of these overtimes, and Adam Lemery says, preach it, Ben, he'll agree. I think Ben made some great points. I think you made some great points as well, Amanda. I like it, the idea, but I mean, I'm sitting there with my mother watching the race, and a caution comes out. I'm like, okay. And then another caution. I'm like, why is there 12 cars wrecked in turn one? And then another caution. I'm just like sitting there like this. Do you know that song? I don't know if you do. This is the song that doesn't end, it goes on. I felt like that with the race. And I know I've tweeted it before. I don't know which race it was, but where the overtime just keeps going and going. So definitely, I think NASCAR should at least explore the change of the idea, or the idea of the change. I don't know how they do it. Maybe limited again one. And I was hoping, I really was sitting there on the edge of my feet, hoping one of the guys in the Fox Sports booth asked Gunther Steiner how he felt about it. Because I don't know if he felt too wonderful about it, but obviously coming from the Formula One, Haas F1's team principal, obviously their races end straight under. If a safety car comes out on lap 55 of 56, the race is effectively over. So I pretty much wanted to hear what he was going to say, but I'll throw it back over to you, Ben.
Yeah, well, and you know, we had two F1 world champions in this race today. You know, what do you think? How do you think Jenson Button feels? Like, welcome to NASCAR Cup Series racing, Jenson Button. I mean, the thing is, and Gunther being in the booth today as well. You bring up a great point with that, Matthew. That there's a saying, cautions breed cautions. Obviously, we heard that on the Fox broadcast today as well. That saying doesn't exist in Formula One. There is no safety cars breed safety cars. You know, I suppose every so often, you know, we see you know, a safety car immediately followed by another one. But we never see the insanity that we saw towards the end of the race today, because when Formula One cars restart after a safety car, it's a single file line. The leader decides when to go in a much larger restart zone, and they have opportunity to space out. And so they're not all crammed together, double file, all on top of each other going into a tight turn one on a road course. So, you know, I think that brings up another good point here. Maybe NASCAR could learn from a different motorsport series and say, maybe we can keep the overtime rule, even though I would be in favor of ditching it, obviously, but maybe we can, again, have another compromise here by keeping overtime. But if it's under 10 to go or something like that, we go to a single file restart, we space them out a little bit more on the restarts, particularly on the road courses, and we go from there. And hopefully, I would think that would lead to at least a lower percent chance at seeing the chaos that we saw today. I also found it kind of amusing. This will be the last point, then we can move on. Kurt Busch being in the booth, not even knowing that the rule is currently unlimited attempts. I suppose we could have had 7 if we needed it. But he was like, okay, we're coming to the third one here. This is it. This is, you know, the final attempt we're going to have. And he didn't even know what the rule was. And I can't blame him when he, you know, had his reaction and said, are you kidding me? You know, we're going to do this as many times as we need, because it just gets so tiring. And honestly, they probably should have thrown the caution on the third one as well. I think the control tower and everybody at COTA just decided we want to go home. But I think if what happened in the back of the field on overtime number 3 happens on lap 7 of the race, I think they throw the caution almost immediately, because there were cars that were torn up that were probably spewing all sorts of debris on the racing surface there. So again, just a comedy of errors towards the end of the race, but we've got more show to get to, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, definitely. I think maybe a cool thing, just quickly, I promise, to base it off that, maybe just do one time, but start at the white flag. I know people sometimes encourage, say, maybe let's race it all the way back to line if there's caution. I don't like that idea, though. I really don't, because of safety. Maybe on a road course it might be different, but I don't like the idea of, if the front of the field wrecks, the guy in 25th has to race through that. I don't like that. I like when the caution comes out. So I'm just throwing out random ideas. Overtime line, probably not. Let's ignore that idea. But yeah, just to touch on that quickly.
To follow up real quick on the white flag. That's something that ARC has done in the past, and I think particularly on the super speedways, I mean, sometimes it takes a lap to, just so much as get up to speed. So I don't know if that's enough time to, have a if you're going to do it, you might as well give them 2 laps so that you can, set up some sort of finish there. I don't know that 1 lap's enough time. And then, Formula One fans, I think, certainly still have some painful, disillusioning memories from Abu Dhabi a couple of years ago. So, that's another motorsport example there that you can throw in. But I wouldn't be a fan of that either. I think, obviously, not a huge fan of overtime, generally speaking, but if you're going to do it, I would give them 2 full laps to get up to speed and try to set up a finish that way.
Definitely. I think, yeah, great. And then obviously we make the joke about 8-time world champion Lewis Hamilton. I've said it a few times. But looking at the NASCAR grid rating, something I make sure to include in my NASCAR stories you see every Monday morning, it's the consistency in NASCAR compared to the other series in grid ranking is not something we really see. Like, as you take a look at the leaderboard here, William Byron only has 3 top 10 finishes. 2 of them are wins, and then a top 10 today, actually leads it. And then Alex Bowman, actually, in fact, he's on the board here, but he has the highest top 10 finish rate. And it's interesting because he is actually 5th, despite having the highest top 10 finish rate at 83% after today. Guys, as you can see, Christopher Bell, Kyle Busch, they're the only drivers with a top 10 finish rate better than 50%, the only other one. So interesting to see how much the grid rating weighs on these top 10 finishes. You have guys like William Byron, 2 wins, but pretty much not really near the top 10, and he's actually ahead of it all. Then you have guys like Kyle Busch. I know it's Kyle Busch, Alex Bowman, actually Martin Truex Jr. They're the only drivers that ever finished in the top 20 in every single race this season, but notice how Truex isn't on the board. So that's an interesting thing, but to actually continue with this, so I apologize for rambling on. But drivers with less than a 50% top 10 finish rate this season include Larson, Keselowski, and Hamlin, all at 33%. Truex Jr., like I said, Briscoe, and Austin Dillon only have a 17% top 10 finish rate, but they could easily make their way into the grid rating with a few top 10s, few high-placed finishes like Christopher Bell and Tyler Reddick have done from what you can see here. And then I just touched on, it's interesting to see everyone has had at least one race outside the top 10, but Bowman, Busch, and Truex are the only drivers to not have a race outside the top 20. I'm going to throw this one to you, Amanda. The grid ranking is a lot about, and the ratings about consistency. Do you believe a consistent driver can point their ways in the playoffs, even if they don't get a win this season?
I think that I want to say yes. I want to be optimistic and say yes, that it's early enough for that to happen. But I think that the consistency would have to start now and carry through week to week, probably until close to the end of the season. So I guess I'll say I hope so, but we shall see.
Yeah, I think this goes back to the parity discussion we were having a little bit earlier in this segment. We still saw Ryan Blaney able to do it last year. When we had that whole discussion about how high he was in the point standings and not winning a points paying race last year. And, because of the amount of parity that we saw, him and Martin Truex Jr. being in danger of missing the playoffs with all the different winners we were seeing. If the parity goes up, I think the number of different winners is going to go down. So I think there will be a few spots open by the end of the first 26 races to be able to have a few drivers at the very least point their way in. But again, maybe not as much as we might have seen in other seasons as well, because, it's only the second year of the car. We're still seeing teams get up to speed on certain tracks here, especially the tracks we only go to one time a year. So I think you might see a little bit more parity than you will on average, but not as much as we saw last year. So I think there will be some spots for a few consistent drivers left over at the end of the first 26.
Yeah, definitely. I think with the new next-gen car as well, it's very hard to tell who's going to win this race and who's not going to win a race. So in terms of consistency, I couldn't name you off the top of my head drivers I think that won't win in the first 26 races, but will get in on points. I feel like that's tough. We haven't seen a Ryan Blaney win in a while. Maybe Martin Truex Jr., we haven't seen a points-paying race win in a while. Obviously, all top 20 finishes, but he just doesn't seem to be himself this season. So Martin Truex Jr. could be another guy, though. He's still consistently in the top 20, can point his way in. So I can agree with both of you there. I think it could happen. I just want to throw a quick follow-up while we end NASCAR. One of the big things with NASCAR was the road ringers, bringing all the different motorsport series, whether it's IndyCar, whether it's Formula One, and then IMSA, all those guys. So I wanted to ask you guys, either of you can take the first part here. So Jenson Button finished 18th. He was the best of the road ringers, from Formula One world champion. Jordan Taylor in his NASCAR Cup debut ran up front a lot of the time, finished 24th from the IMSA side of things. Kimi Räikkönen used his bumper a lot. Unfortunately, got a 30-second penalty towards the end of the race. Ended up finishing 29th in his second Cup race. And then Connor Daly, unfortunately, with the money team having mechanical issues yet again with him, finishing 36th. So either of you can take the floor for this one. How'd you feel about the road ringers today? They didn't really finish up near the top, but they got their NASCAR debut. And then just a quick point, Jenson Button said something about this race felt like an entire Formula One season, I believe, in an interview with Dustin Long. I assume that probably goes towards the ending of it as well. But yeah, so I'll stop talking. Take the floor, please.
Yeah, I guess they probably ended up about where they all should have, considering all things considered. But it's kind of sad for Kimi. He was running pretty well, especially got helped out by staying out for one of the later restarts. And then it all fell apart for him in the end there. Also tragic for Connor Daly with the mechanical issues. But I guess the one surprise was probably Jordan Taylor. Maybe I overhyped him a little bit too much. So it was disappointing to see him fall back early on. But yeah, I think that this is probably, I don't think it's a disappointing performance from any of them, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I think Connor in particular is very limited by his equipment, so I'd like to see him get an opportunity. No disrespect to the people working on that car at the money team. I know they're doing the best of what they can, but that car does not have the resources, to say the least, that I think even Jenson Button had in this race, because even though that's a Rick Ware car, I think they got a lot of support from Stuart Haas for this one, and obviously he had Mobil 1 coming on as a partner there. I feel bad for Kimi. I must confess, I didn't even realize there's so much going on at the end of the race. I must have missed that 30-second time penalty, so I guess that's why he fell further back. But, he certainly showed that he was willing to get his elbows out a little bit and use the bumper, when he had an opportunity to restart there in the top 5 or close to it, at least during the end. And Jordan Taylor as well. I said in the chat in the pre-race show yesterday that I thought, top 10 might not be out of the question for him. And to his credit, he did run in that position for part of the race today. But I think just the chaos of, the multiple overtimes kind of shuffled him back a little bit, which is unfortunate. But, certainly hope Chase Elliott's doing well. It's good to see him on the broadcast today, and hope that he can return soon. But at the same time, under different circumstances, I would love to see Jordan Taylor get another opportunity in a quality Cup ride, because I think he deserves it.
And definitely, I can agree with both of that. Both of those statements as well. I think it's interesting. I love the idea of motorsport all coming together. I think this might be I know NASCAR, I said on the pre-race show, had a huge dip in ratings, I feel, this season. I think we can all notice that by the numbers. But I think having these guys from different disciplines, the top level, 2 Formula One world champions, multiple-time IMSA champion, and then Connor Daly's an IndyCar driver, bringing that part of the American open-wheel motorsport. I think this is great for the ratings. I think there might still be a decline, but at the same time, I think it might be less of a decline as what we have seen. So I just want to point that out. I think they all ran a great race. I think NASCAR is its own breed, but at the same time, Formula One, IndyCar, IMSA are all its own breed. It's all a completely different type of motorsport. So I can say that. But yeah, I'll bring in Kobe before we head into MotoGP, though.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about in MotoGP. A lot of controversial things happening over there at Portimao. But before we get into that, Matthew, understanding you have to get going. So what's your grid one shining moment from this racing weekend?
I know the fans are probably sick of me rambling on, but I think, obviously, I would have to say I think it'd be Tyler Reddick getting that win. Obviously, his road course dominance. Kurt Busch being in the booth, seeing that number 45 Monster Energy Toyota get in the victory lane. However, I'm going to throw a little shot at Monster Energy because this diecast, obviously, if you guys watch the pre-race show, I always pull up a diecast for who I got to pick a winner. I picked Tyler Reddick, finally got a NASCAR pick. However, Monster Energy no longer produced a diecast, I believe, since Kurt Busch's 2019 Kentucky win. So it's an unfortunate, I don't know if that's maybe the most shining moment of it, but hopefully they come to an agreement to get this race win diecast out there. I think it would look great for Tyler Reddick. Definitely fans of Tyler Reddick as well, and then definitely collectors. So I'm going to go with the number 45 team for 2311. I think NASCAR overall bringing this event to COTA and then having different motorsports disciplines as well. So I'll stop talking. Thank you guys for a great show, and that's my one shining moment from this weekend.
Just real quick, Matthew, thank you for bringing that up because I get very frustrated. There are so many Coca-Cola schemes that I would love to see, and I think Haley Deegan's 2020 ARCA car was a Haley Deegan shop exclusive that got made. I think that's the last monster car that got a diecast, but it is unfortunate because that car would look nice as a race-winning diecast. So hopefully times change here soon enough, and even maybe 10 years down the road, maybe they offered him a NASCAR Classics line. Who knows? But it is very frustrating as a collector to see that.
Hopefully Lionel gets the contract. Hopefully Monster, Coca-Cola, they can figure something out for us collectors, obviously.
Yeah, Matthew, once again, thank you for being here. And for all our viewers, head to gridranking.com tomorrow so you can read Matthew's race recap of today's NASCAR Cup Series race at COTA. And with that said, gonna move on to MotoGP. And before we recap the Portuguese Grand Prix, want to provide you with two updates since we went off the air yesterday afternoon. The first, Pol Espargaro, who was flown to Barcelona to be evaluated to see if he needed surgery for his broken jaw. There's no timeline when he'll return to full-time ride. And secondly, we mentioned Enea Bastianini's crash on the second lap of the sprint race. After we went off the air, it was announced that Enea had a broken shoulder blade and did not compete in the Grand Prix today. Bastianini will also miss out on the Argentinian Grand Prix, a horrible start for the new Ducati factory rider. This started to bring out many riders to voice their concerns on the sprint race formats. After the race, Fabio Quartararo warned that there will be a big accident. I mean, it's a jungle. We are not in cars that in the end you touch, and it's not a problem. Journalist Simon Patterson brought up a good point about the number of injuries after the sprint race compared to past years. And last year, our own Joshua Burt said that this was a safety race, and it appears the riders agree with him. And Ben, we're going to bring Joe in. How concerning is it that we have riders who seem worried since the announcement of the sprint races, the injuries we saw, and we have 20 sprints and 20 full Grand Prix races left to go?
It's very concerning. Let me be very, very clear. Of course, if you're a regular Grid Network viewer, you'll know that I don't usually talk about MotoGP. I have nothing against it. It's just not one of the series that I am most familiar with or follow the most closely. But one of the reasons I think for that is I've always, been a little bit turned off by the danger aspect. And I know that all motorsports have that to a certain extent, but I'm reminded of a quote that I first heard in the movie Rush that's attributed to Niki Lauda when he said, for him personally, there's a 20% risk and he's okay with that whenever he straps into a car. Anything beyond that, he's not okay with. And he wasn't okay with it at Nürburgring in 1976. And unfortunately, that race resulted in his tragic accident. And then, of course, he had his remarkable comeback. And then the last race of the year in monsoon-like conditions, he ended up pulling out of the race because he believed that risk threshold had been crossed again. For me personally, I think of what happens in MotoGP when these guys crash. When you're in a car, you at the bare minimum have a surrounding crush panels and things like that will hit the wall, and you're a little bit protected there. And in MotoGP, you don't have that. You're just kind of at the mercy of the speed and whatever direction you're headed in. And I know very well that accidents can happen at any point when cars or bikes or whatever trucks are out there on track. But I think, this was another point that I saw on Twitter as well. Forgive me, I don't remember who it was exactly, but, people are much more likely to take unnecessary risks in a race format than they are in a free practice one or whatever. And I think when you have all these sprint races that are going to be lining up here, you're going to see more opportunities for moves that might result in an accident. And unfortunately, when there are more accidents, I think you're going to see more injuries as well, just because of what I just mentioned about the nature of this series. So all due respect to all the riders out there who put their lives on the line every week for the opportunity to do what they love. But to me, I just think that the sport is dangerous enough as it is already to amplify that risk by having all these sprint races on the calendar this year, and to forgive me, I don't even know if this is the first race of the year, second race of the year, whatever it is, to already have multiple injuries that we're talking about here on this show, I think doesn't bode well for the future of these sprint races. And then if you want to bring in the Formula One side of things, it's a very polarizing subject over there when we haven't really had any injuries to talk about in the sprint races over there. So you could at least say, well, it's dangerous, but at least the fans are getting a much better show. Half the fans don't like the sprint race format anyway. So what are we gaining from having these sprint races that makes up for the unfortunate injuries that we're seeing here that, I don't want to speak anything into existence here. I hope we don't see any more of those going on the rest of the season. But if we have 20 of these left, as my understanding goes here, I don't see how we're going to get through the entire year without drivers if at some point saying enough is enough. But I think it's very unlikely that we could get through all of that if we're having multiple injuries already this early in the season. So I'm very concerned, but I'll turn it over to Joe now, see what he has to say.
One of the big things when it comes to the sprint races, I still remember last year when you had the CEO of Dorna, Carmelo, the FIM president, Jorge, up there in the press conference, and they were very defensive when the media were asking them questions about, did the riders want this? Did the riders support this? Is this too dangerous? They seemed very defensive and almost shocked that they weren't getting praise for bringing essentially more races to the race weekends. I cannot think of any of the major motorsports series essentially doubling the race calendar over season. Because Formula One, they've gone from 16 to 17, slowly creeping up to where they are right now. What Dorna did with MotoGP, they extended the calendar to 21 race weekends, and then with a sprint race, essentially 42 races. Next week, they're all going to Argentina. In a span of 14 days, they're going to have done 2 Grand Prix races, and the sprint races, which is about half the distance, that's 3 races. And these riders go through so much. We talk about the arm pump injuries, the surgery that so many riders have to get because the physical forces they go through on their bikes week in and week out. The dangers of this sport. We've seen riders that unfortunately fall in the front of the pack, get hurt when there's another bike coming. This is just something where it really elevates it. And I just shocked that we're still talking about this. And now we've had a couple riders injured to the point where 22 riders were going to be on the grid. We're down to 20. Marc Marquez, granted it was on the race today, the Grand Prix, he may have a fractured right hand. We may have 19 riders in Argentina. We assume they're going to bring in a substitute for Ducati for Enea Bastianini. But this, I feel, has just really gotten to a point where Dorna Motorsports, I feel, is sort of at a different odds with the teams and the riders, because the riders have made it clear they're racers. They're going to go out there and race for that championship because they know that championship is the difference between extending their MotoGP career another 2 or 3 years or the end of their career because they're going to give that seat to somebody else climbing up the ranks. Those sprint races, all 20 of them that are left remaining, that's a lot of points available on the line. Already, Pecco Bagnaia for sweeping the race weekends has a big lead. You can't just go out there because there's only 3 or 4 sprint races, take it easy, wait for the Grand Prix. You have to race each sprint race hard to get as much valuable points. The top 9 are getting points only. And we saw that, I felt, the sprint race a lot more chaotic than the Grand Prix. And it's just something where I feel this is sending the wrong message for MotoGP to say, we're going to do this, even the riders are opposed to it. I just feel like this is a step backwards. And really, after this race weekend, I feel now hearing not just the riders, but like Simon and others bringing this up. Is this really what the fans want? To see the riders race and potentially be at more risk, more danger, because now the races are doubled to 42 races in a year. I just think this is really It's unsettling, it's disturbing, and it's concerning. I feel if we go through the rest of the year without a serious injury, particularly in a sprint race, I don't feel that's the riders stepping it up. I feel that's almost MotoGP dodge a bullet, and nobody wants to see a rider get hurt out there on the track.
Absolutely, Joe. We definitely don't want to see anyone get hurt. But I just want to ask, like, what are we doing? Why are we why is there a need to run 42 races in a year? And we know with these MotoGP riders, they're already traveling all over the world enough. And if they actually compete and for over 40 races, I wonder if we could see some of these riders who typically, try to run, into their late 30s, early 40s. Are they going to start retiring earlier because at some point, the wear and tear on their bodies is going to start to show, and they may get tired of all of this racing because too much of something won't always be a good thing. And Joe, I would really be surprised if I really hate to say this. I don't want to speak anything bad into existence, but I'd be surprised if we make it through the rest of the year and these sprint race without another serious injury. And with these races being obviously a lot shorter, you're asking these riders, to be more aggressive in the races because there's not a lot of time compared to a full distance MotoGP Grand Prix event where you can just settle into a rhythm and a methodical approach, and you can set yourself up for the end. Because in the sprint race, you have to go like right from the start. You don't have time to wait around, pace yourself, put yourself in the right position for later in the race. You have to be on it right then. So. And you said, Joe, those riders are going to go out there and compete to try to win the championship, collect those points, and win as many races as they can, so they can be in contention at the end of the year. So they're just creatures of nature. They're going to be taking those extra risks, and I'll say unnecessary risks. So it's going to be interesting to see what MotoGP is going to do at the end of the year. I wonder if we get to a point where it's getting kind of crazy. They might just decide no more sprint races for the rest of the year. But I have a bad feeling of where we could go from here with these sprint races. I'm just afraid that we're going to see somebody get seriously injured.
Well, I'm reminded in 2016 in Formula One, they tweaked the qualifying format a little bit. It made it kind of an elimination style with the clock counting down and everything. And it was so disastrous. Thankfully, it was disastrous for reasons other than injury, but it was so disastrous that they scrapped it after just a few rounds and went back to the way it used to be. I would hope that MotoGP, especially if we, again, don't want to speak anything into existence here, but if we have a couple more injuries, I would hope that they would take a step back and realize that we can't continue to do this with a good conscience and go back to what works for, however the last many numbers of years it's been, and see that these sprint races are an unnecessary gimmick striving to increase the entertainment factor when they're not even doing that and they're leading to more injuries. And I feel particularly bad for Marc Marquez, and other riders, I'm sure, who have had injuries in the past that have worked so hard to come back from them that now, have yet another opportunity during the weekend to face potential for more injury risk. It just seems very unnecessary to me, and I don't know what we're gaining from it. Again, I'm not speaking as a MotoGP expert or fan here, so maybe somebody out there can provide an argument in favor of them, but I just don't see it.
Yeah, for sure. I don't see it either. And next, moving on to the race itself. So as we've been saying, we have 20 races to go, 20 sprints. The first one is in the books, and it was all Pecco Bagnaia. Again, Pecco started on the front row, didn't have the lead at first, but came back to take the lead early. The big break of the race was Miguel Oliveira, who had the lead, and then later in second place got taken out by Marc Marquez. Oliveira had to be stretchered away, but thankfully he was awake and alert. And just to be clear, this was the race, not the sprint race. When Marc Marquez, for that move on Miguel Oliveira, the fans booed him. They did not like it at all. But this allowed Pecco to race without any serious challenge from any other competitor. Maverick Vinales ended up taking second place in the Aprilia, and Marco Bezzecchi third with the VR46, Muni Ducati. Joe, if this crash didn't happen, would Pecco have had a harder time defending the lead?
That's a really hard question because at the beginning of the race, we saw Jorge was up there. Miguel Oliveira got the lead, but then lost it. It's just so early because we've only had just a one sprint race where you had a different top three finishers. Essentially, those two of them, Marquez, Jorge, they were out of the race. I overall feel the Ducati this year, they're looking just as strong as last year. We saw a little bit further in the back how Alex Marquez, who's now with Ducati and essentially Enea Bastianini's old seat, without the draft, could just get around the KTMs of Brad Binder, Jack Miller, like they were holding still. The Pramac Ducatis. Jorge Martin, unfortunately, he went out, but we saw Johan Zarco come towards the front. I think the Ducatis, they got another rocket ship. The way Pecco Bagnaia looks confident up there, I feel when we saw Maverick Vinales closing up a little bit on him, that could have been Pecco just taking it easy because he knows he got this race under control. He's a defending champion. He looks very confident there. I think this was going to be Pecco's race to lose. We know a lot of folks on Pick Winner have picked him as well too. It's just something where at the end, this might be Ducati season. Unfortunately, they're one rider short, so it's going to be a little hard for the factory team constructors championship. But for the drivers, I think it's going to be pretty much you have to go through Pecco to get any shot at this championship.
Definitely, Joe. And Pecco Bagnaia was quite a dominant opening weekend for him to kick out this MotoGP season, sweeping the sprint in the feature race at Portimao, and it's very well looking like 2023 could be the year of Pecco Bagnaia once again. Really great performance to kick off 2023. And I also want to do a quick follow-up question. We saw Fabio Quartararo have a very, very lousy weekend, to say the least. So here's my question. Does it look like Yamaha didn't bring a good bike for 2023? And if that's the case, could it be a very, very long year for Fabio Quartararo, who's really been slumping lately?
It is going to be a very long year for Fabio Quartararo and that Yamaha team. I mean, Fabio Quartararo, he came in here, and I thought this was going to be a big break because traditionally we're in Qatar for the start of the season, not here. Quartararo has 2 wins here. I thought this was going to play into his advantage. Then we had the preseason testing. It didn't seem Yamaha was really there. There was hopes that race pace will be better. He'll show up. Nothing in the sprint race. Didn't score any points. Today, just not contended for the win. I'm not convinced Yamaha brought a good bike for 2023. You look at Ducati, the factory team, they're looking strong. And then, of course, the independent teams, VR46, Mooney, they got last year's bike. Last year's bike was just as good as this year, it looks like. He's going to have a really hard time this year. I think it's going to be really rough. And just unfortunate because he just, again, re-signed with Yamaha. Last year when we were talking about where he would go, he stuck with Yamaha. Starting to wonder if he's had a little bit of remorse about that because it just seems like the sprint races and the Grand Prix, he's going to be struggling, I think. It might be a couple tracks where he could really come into play. I think Jerez, maybe Germany, but I think they're going to have a long season ahead.
Yeah, 2023 might, if Fabio Quartararo might end up having the Lewis Hamilton experience this year. You know, they still have a talented driver / rider behind the wheel, but when your equipment is not up to par, it's certainly going to create some challenges there, and we'll certainly be following Fabio's progress throughout the year to see if he can take that Yamaha back to the top step of the podium, because towards the end of last year we saw Fabio struggling a lot, and the opening weekend of the year didn't really go well at all for him. So he'll hope to turn it around with these next couple of races we got coming up in Argentina and the Grand Prix of the Americas at COTA, where the NASCAR Cup Series race at today. And with the first weekend sweep of 2023, Pecco Bagnaia leads the grid rating for MotoGP. As I said, they'll be racing next weekend in Argentina, so the top 5 can still change around. However, we can tell you that entering the weekend, the 3 racers most likely to contend for the grid ranking week 1 lead are Pecco Bagnaia from MotoGP, IndyCar driver Marcus Ericsson, and Formula 1 driver Max Verstappen. Verstappen needs to win, and Ericsson and Bagnaia must have bad weekends. If all 3 have bad weekends, the week 1 grid ranking lead is up for grabs. Only 3 different racers have led week 1 of the grid ranking. Those were Sebastian Bourdais in 2017 and 18, Scott McLaughlin in 2019, 2020 and 2022, then Shane Van Gisbergen in 2021. Week 1 will be released on the air here on Grid Live Wrap Up.
All right. Thank you, Kobe. And now we're going to wrap things up here with our one shining moment. So we invite all of you who are stuck with us to comment your one shining moment from the weekend in the chat here. And we heard from Ed, we heard from Matthew, but now we'll hop to you, Kobe. What was your one shining moment from this weekend?
My one shining moment has to go to the driver finished 10th in the NASCAR Cup Series race today. Got to give a call to Todd Gilliland. We know Todd was told late in the game that he wouldn't be full-time in a number 38 car for Front Row Motorsports, so he had to go searching for another ride. Thankfully, Rick Ware Racing was able to step up, put him in that 15 car for all the races he's going to miss. And I believe he's going to be in the number 36 car with the final race that Todd needed to fill. So now Todd's going to be in all the races, and to have the rug pull out from under you like that and come up and show what you got. I know there was a lot of chaos happening at COTA, but Todd was able to do the best that he could, took advantage of all of the craziness with all of the overtimes, ended up getting a top 10. I think this was a great confidence booster for Todd Gillen to show that he deserved to be in that number 38 car for all 36 points paying races.
My one shining moment is going to go to Formula E, the Jaguar team with that 1-3 finish. We saw the last race weekend for them with really badly. Sam Bird had that penalty. He even took out his teammate. They responded with a 1-3 finish, and it was really great to see. That was kind of incident where we've seen in other sports that could really ruin a team. It seemed like this Jaguar team, especially Sam Bird, Mitch Evans, had rallied to, hey, we got to work together. Let's try to just be as one Jaguar team. The chemistry seems to be right there. Overall, I thought that was a great, impressive weekend for the Jaguar team to respond with that. We have a comment from Adam McGreen, Matthew, for the one shiny moment, but that was my one shiny moment. The Jaguar team gained double podiums and rebounded after a horrible prior race weekend in Formula E.
Forgive me for taking the easy one, but I want to give mine to Tyler Reddick. I think it would have been a darn shame if he hadn't been able to convert that great run into the win today. I know they tried their best again with all those crazy overtime restarts and all the chaos that we saw, particularly down in turn one, or up in turn one, I guess I should say, at Circuit of the Americas. But a great run for him and the entire 2311 team today. That team certainly looks like they're headed in the right direction, and I want to give them my one shining moment as we close out tonight's show.
All right. And to wrap things up, I would also have to obviously give my one shining moment to Tyler Reddick, but I also want to shout out William Byron for making the race a race and making sure that Tyler Reddick didn't just run away with the trophy and run away out front. So I think that they pulled off a lot of really close racing and kept things interesting at the front.
Great racing up front between those two, and we know, of course, William Byron was your pick a winner. Several folks got pick a winner correct, particularly because of Pecco Bagnaia. The ones that picked Pecco Bagnaia for both the sprint and the Grand Prix got points. And look at this. We have a championship battle. Edward has a 1-point lead over Kobe, 1 point behind him. You got Matt, Joshua T, and then a couple points behind him. You got Alex, Ben's up there. It is getting close. And there's still a ton of races. I mean, we got 40 MotoGP races alone. So we got a lot of racing. And Kobe, it seems you might be back. Where was your golden horseshoe hiding?
I honestly have no idea, Joe. I guess it's bad because my internet never cut out tonight. I'm also very happy about that. And my last words for the night, Ed, I'm coming for you.
Going to be a lot of fun. We encourage everyone every Wednesday. We'll post a new pick a winner, and we got a busy race weekend. We got a busy week right here on the Grid Network. Tomorrow, we're going to have Grid Encore. Ben's going to be recapping the NASCAR race weekend at Circus of America. We're going to have Moto 2, Moto 3, and then, of course, Casey with the Five Flag Speedways ARCA Menards East Series. Tuesday, very special. We got our airing of the interview with Callum Isla. So be sure to subscribe, not miss that. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about the race weekend at St. Petersburg, the upcoming race weekend at Texas Motor Speedway, and now another season with Junko's Hollinger Racing. Wednesday, Grid Tonight, Kobe, as well as Casey and Matt White. They're going to be there. And of course, Grid Tonight, that's where on April 12th, the Grid Endurance Performance Index will come out. Nothing new on Thursday, but we encourage everyone, check out Life on the Grid, the playlist. Great opportunity to see our newest episode with Igor Romanov. Kobe Ben did a great job interviewing him. Very powerful episode. So Thursday, you're thinking, hey, there's nothing new. Check out our Life on the Grid playlist and any past episodes you may have missed. And Friday, the Women in Motorsports, Daniel and myself will be on the air recapping all the female athletes racing around the world. And that is, of course, every Friday right here on the Grid Air. And the best way to watch it, be sure to subscribe to us right here on YouTube. Like, comment, share with your friends and family members that are into motorsports as well. We do everything we can to bring you the best coverage. And of course, thanks to our supporters from Calling the Show, Mark Robin, and David, the newest one, investing in us each and every month. We're expanding our team. We're expanding our coverage. We'd love to be at more races. Help us pay the bills through Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. You set the amount. You can make a one-time contribution to the Grid Network or to your favorite on-air personality right here on the Grid Network. And a couple of last comments from Ed. You will come up, Kobe. So definitely, I think it's going to be a really fun year for Pick a Winner, and we encourage everyone to be sure to stay involved with Pick a Winner and all our programs. Almost all of them are live streaming, so you can always comment in the chat room. For Kobe, Amanda, and Ben, I'm Joe. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time. Take care and have a good night. Thank you for watching us right here on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and check out some of our other videos, including Life on the Grid, where we interview folks from the motorsports industry. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.